welcome everyone to this webinar on Global Life Science Superpower, the Future of Medicine's Valuation, supported by the ABPI. I'm Eleonora Harwich, Director of Research at Reform, and will be chairing today's session. So while we wait for all of the participants to connect, because I can see it's fastly coming through, I thought that we would prepare a little poll about a burning question that is on everyone's mind at the moment, which is you can and will be able to cast your votes and predictions about when you think we will get a COVID-19 vaccine. So I will launch the poll right now, which you should be seeing it pop up as a little window. So obviously there is, the very hopeful potential of by the end of the year, between January and March 2021, April, August 2021, and then, kind of other options. I can see the votes are coming in, which is really great. It seems that most of you now think that potentially between April and August. I will share the poll in a few seconds. I'm just going to wait for a bit more votes to come in. Okay, so we're about 90% of the votes in. It seems to not be moving, so I will end the poll now and share the results with you. So the winning option, and I guess we will take you up on this once we are in April, August 2021, but most of you think that the vaccine will be ready for commercialization by then. Let's fingers crossed and hope that that is actually the case. Fantastic. So again, as I said, welcome everyone. And sorry, we have a little question. Are all attendees muted? Yes, all attendees are muted. So I'm Eleonora Harwich, Director of Research at Reform, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on the future of medicine's valuation. So if there's one thing that obviously COVID-19 has done in a positive sense is really remind us of the importance of really supporting the life sciences ecosystem, but by having the right policies in place to support the discovery and development of new treatments. And crucial to this, kind of well-functioning life sciences industry is ensuring that patients do get access to the most effective medicines while ensuring value for money for the NHS. And that is the crucial role of the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, which is currently undergoing a review of its valuation methods. And I'm really keen to discuss during this event the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead in the medicine's valuation and how this could be used as an opportunity to place the UK as a science superpower, as it's the kind of stated ambition of government. So we'll start off this event by asking each panelist to set out their thoughts for about 4 minutes on the topic, and then we will start a shared discussion. So for those of you attending this event, at the very bottom of your screen, you will see a little bar with different options. You should have a little button that says Q&A. Please do feel free to post your questions in this as the kind of discussion goes along. We will be monitoring that Q&A chat. You will also see a chat button. So that really would be reserved for any comments that you'd like to make that are not questions. So that will not be closely monitored, but do feel free to obviously, comment and share thoughts on that chat, as we're really keen to have the audience participate as much as possible. So now I will ask panelists to introduce themselves and set out their perspective on the future of medicine's valuation. And I will start with Lord Bethel. So if you could kind of set out your thoughts for about 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. Well, gosh, 4 minutes isn't long. But Eleanor, thank you very much indeed for inviting us. And what an impressive panel. I feel really honoured to be part of this important event. I'm going to start by giving this whole thing a little bit of context and just to frame it in what we understand to be the life science mission and the role in which innovation and adoption plays in that. Life sciences is a really important part of the government's vision going forwards. It is a huge opportunity to make a big impact. And there are 3 big areas where I think the life sciences mission can make the most impact. The most basic of which is to give patients longer, better lives. I mean, that is the big objective of health, after all. And it's also a Conservative Party manifesto commitment. So beyond the values part of it, it's also a political dimension to it. But I also think that there's a way in which we can increase the empowerment of patients, and we live in a world where voter power, patient power is really pertinent. Part of the life sciences mission is to put self-care and personalized solutions at the heart of people's medicines. And there's also an important leveling up and fairness agenda. We really want life sciences to be there to address some of the disparities in health outcomes. And the biggest impact you can make on someone's life is to give them a longer and better life. And the way in which we can do this, the three really big engines of innovation that can drive change are genomics, artificial intelligence, and big data. They are like the superchargers that can introduce radical reforms into the way in which our healthcare is provided. And any one of those could be a seminar in themselves, and I won't dwell on them now. But I think in order to make those engines of innovation work, there are some enablers that we have to get right. We have to get digitization right and get patient records available for research and for understanding resource allocation. We need to get our clinical trials regime really super driven, and the recovery trial has been an example of how that can work in best practice, but there's also some modernization that is desperately needed. We're working on getting a really great regulatory regime in place, and I pay tribute to MHRA, who is our standout regulator, but also to NICE, who, whilst not strictly speaking a regulator, provides the framework in which a lot of decisions are made. And then fourthly and lastly, our diagnostics regime. And we're having a massive reboot of Britain's diagnostics capabilities through the test and trace regime. And that is hopefully a inflection point for the entire industry and diagnostics. But all of that is only relevant if we actually adopt the innovative science that is developed through the life sciences mission. And we have a record that we should be proud of. And I am enormously proud of NICE. It is the envy of the world. When I speak to my opposite numbers, they always bring it up as the organization that brings rigor and thoughtfulness and fairness and proactivity to the way in which new medicines and devices are introduced into our massive healthcare system. And I'm really, really a big exponent and defender of the NICE approach. But I am also a huge advocate for early adoption of innovation. And there is more we could do. The NHS undoubtedly could be thinking about ways in which it could take new medicines on board quicker, showcase them to the world, get them to patients more effectively and earlier. And that's why we have the review. It's a review that I am really pleased to see in process. I'm really optimistic that it can bring in some reforms that will be really powerful for patients primarily, but also give a clear signal to the global pharmaceutical and devices industry that Britain is a place where you should be introducing medicines, showcasing them, and seeing the NHS in premature quality stamped on what it does. So that's why I am really pleased to be here. I'm really excited to hear Richard and Gillian and Samantha make their presentations. And I'll hand back to you to move on to the next round.
Thank you very much. So Samantha, do you also share that, I guess, kind of enthusiasm about the kind of potential of this review to be really powerful for patients? And I guess, what's your patient perspective on this question?
Absolutely. I'd echo Lord Bethel's praise for NICE. We know they are the international gold standard, over the last 20 years. That's where a lot of the health technology appraisal innovation has come from. It's originated from things we have done in the UK. And I think the NICE Methods Review presents us with a huge opportunity to look at the way the fast progress in scientific discovery and drug discovery and the increasing number of drug authorizations needs to then translate into faster access for patients and then better patient outcomes in the UK. With the external context changing, with us leaving the European Union. I think there is a real opportunity to look across the medicines valuation ecosystem, but also that wider life sciences ecosystem, to look at how the UK can build its competitive advantage. So we know, as Lord Bethell mentioned, the Conservative Manifesto does pledge huge investments in various areas of the life sciences ecosystem, not least the dementia moonshot. And we need to see that investment in science translating into better access to clinical trials for patients, because we know even that improves patient outcomes. But then we also need to see a regulatory system that has that pull through for patients into the NHS. And that's an area at the moment that feels, from the patient perspective, there are considerable delays. So a report from the ICR a couple of years ago found that whilst drug authorisations had doubled, the actual pace at which a drug was going from patent to patient access and NICE approval was actually taking longer over the last decade. And that's because new medicines face a number of challenges. We're looking at different patient populations, potentially first-in-class treatments that have no comparator, and also situations where the implementation of new medicines or treatments or devices creates considerable challenges for the NHS in terms of implementation. But I think from patient perspectives, it's not good enough to say that these challenges are considerable. We need to find new solutions. And I think that focus on innovation that we've seen through COVID, where you do have this sense of collaborative focus, that sense of, okay, what are the different channels or ways that we can find new compromises or new ways around these issues? I think that really should be a guiding light and a clear rallying cry for how we resolve some of these very tricky challenges. Because for patients, so we represent, as the Charity Medicines Access Coalition, we represent people with Alzheimer's disease for whom there have been no disease-modifying treatments ever. We represent cancer patients, and for metastatic patients, considerable waits for people who have no time to lose. And obviously rare diseases for whom there are no other treatment options. So there is a real sense of urgency that patients bring to this. And I think we've seen that collaborative focus through COVID that I think will provide that sharp focus. And I hope that we're at a pivotal point. And if we can make sure that those various elements of the ecosystem all marry up, we'll see a huge opportunity for the UK to be that global science superpower that we'd all want to see.
Thank you, Samantha. Richard, could I potentially go to you to get the industry perspective on this?
Certainly, thank you very much. And I think we've already heard, Samantha articulate the issues in a really spot-on way from my perspective. And I also think that the ambition that has been laid out by Lord Bethell this morning is also really inspiring, especially for first thing on a Monday morning, if I may say so. I spend a lot of my time in contact with my counterparts around the world, and I genuinely think that there is more energy and creativity in the discussion in this country right now on the critical subject of how we can improve access to medicines for patients, how that we can do it in a way that safeguards value for money for the NHS, and how in doing so we can make this country the best place to invest in. And that's certainly our mission at the ABPI. So like others have said, I think we have the clearest possible example right now of why a healthy nation is so important. Of course, we have during this COVID crisis, and it's also underlined the importance of why we need to have the global capacity to keep innovating. That means innovating with urgency when we've got a massive crisis like this. It's a good job that we had a global industry to a vaccine. By the way, I don't speculate on that question that you put up on the poll at the beginning of the meeting. It will be ready when it's ready, but it is a good job that there is a huge global effort behind this right now. But it also means not just in a crisis, but how do we make the best of science? I think the way Lord Bethell laid out the 3 drivers of genomics, AI, and big data, I think is a very, very helpful starting point for this this conversation, because I think these drivers do and will allow us to get an ever more targeted and effective means of treating patients, often with rare conditions and often with conditions that are currently untreatable. And that is really what the industry pipeline has been reoriented to serve. And you know, I would really argue that we are in a sort of golden age of drug discovery at the moment, where the coming few years really ought to be able to move us on a level in terms of our ability to treat disease. The NICE methods review, just coming straight to the point, I would say NICE is, you know, an incredibly important institution for the pharmaceutical industry as well. I would absolutely echo the comments of Samantha and Lord Bethell here. Of all of the many ways in which there can be scrutiny on the appropriateness of a medicine's price, and there are many ways suggested around the world, international reference pricing, some people would like to base it on R&D costs. I think by a long way, the most rational way of thinking about medicines pricing is to base it on how well a medicine works for patients. And at the end of the day, that's what NICE is all about. It's all about trying to assess value, try to quantify that value, and make sure that the conversation about prices is well informed. One of the things I wanted to mention was that we have a voluntary scheme as an industry in the UK with the government. In fact, we've had a voluntary scheme of one sort or another since the 1950s. The latest version of it caps the total amount of money that is spent on branded medicines in the UK, and that runs until the end of 2023. It's a scheme that we're very proud of, actually. It gives the NHS, it gives the government total certainty on the total amount of money. But what it also does is it gives us a very sharp lens for the industry to look at NICE and look at the importance of health technology assessment. It is all, and that's partly because the industry pays back to government any spend beyond the cap that we've agreed within the scheme. And what that means is that we've got a very, very strong stake ourselves in how NICE works and the methods that it uses to assess. It's critical to ensure fairness for patients, but it's also critical to ensure fairness within the industry because of the financial flows associated with our deal. Now, that might sound a little bit convoluted, but it's actually at its heart really, really simple. It means that we are a really strong partner to government in ensuring value for money. We don't want costs to go out of control, and actually having a reasonable means of ensuring fair scrutiny on the prices of medicines is something that we are very, very committed to. Now, going into this methods review, we think it's very timely, and our focus on this methods review is really to try and address what we perceive to be a particular set of challenges with particularly those medicines for rarer conditions. In fact, precisely the sorts of medicines that are enabled by developments in genomics, AI, and big data. Those happen to be the medicines that tend to systematically have a harder time getting through than many others. One thing you'll never hear from me as head of the ABPI is it's not my job to defend every pharmaceutical price. If prices are too high, then the NHS shouldn't use the medicines, and it's really important that pharmaceutical companies price responsibly. But in order to judge what does responsible pricing look like, we have to have a system that is fair and across all disease areas. And we believe that there's increasingly strong evidence to suggest that there are certain types of medicines that typically have a higher time than others. And that's why in this review, we've made a few suggestions for some modifications in the methods that will allow particularly rarer diseases to be on a level playing field with diseases in other therapeutic areas. I've almost certainly gone over the 4 minutes, and therefore I'm going to be quiet now, behave myself, and put my mute on. Thank you very much.
Richard. That was really interesting. So Gillian, I know, of course, that you can't, unfortunately, tell us exactly what's in the review right now, but could we still get your broad thoughts and perspectives on the kind of methods review and the role it will play within the life sciences ecosystem?
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks to everyone for their positive comments about NICE. We've spent 21 years improving access to medicines for patients, and doing that within the difficult paradigm of looking at what represents good value for money. And that's inevitably a difficult responsibility, and one that I recognise professionally, but also personally. And I see it through the lens of a patient, since my husband was diagnosed with advanced cancer, and it really matters to people what we do. It's not just an academic exercise. Back in 1999, when NICE was set up, we weren't given a toolkit of methods. We established those ourselves, building on experience and expertise of a whole range of stakeholders, not least a whole cadre of health economists. And these methods which we set out at the beginning have evolved over the years to take into account end-of-life criteria, to look at highly specialist technologies, to build a cancer drugs fund with NHS England, which has been a great success in allowing access for patients where there's uncertainty and we need more data. And we have sped up quite a lot over the last 21 years too. All those are good things. But over the past year, we've been reviewing the methods and looking what needs to change for the future. This is the first big review we've done since 2013. So there's a number of things we've wanted to achieve. Particularly, we want to look to the future. It's always a bit rash to say we'll future-proof anything, but we want to make sure we're looking to the future so we can take into account new technological developments, including the things that Lord Bethel has mentioned, artificial intelligence, thinking about big data, and also moving forwards, genomics too. The regulatory landscape is changing. That's been touched on as well. And after we leave the EU transition period, we know the MHRA is expecting to accept higher degrees of uncertainty in the things that they approve, and we need to be ready to align to that so that we can also support the use of medicines where there is more uncertainty, but a desire to get them into practice. And we also know that the Commissioner's tolerance of uncertainty is growing, particularly following the Cancer Drugs Fund success. And we need to keep pace alongside that, and to think about how we work with the Innovative Drugs Fund as that gets put in place. So as we've been reviewing our methods, we've looked at 10 areas, and there will be detail on these 10 areas in the document that goes out for consultation, but I'm not planning to go through all those in detail in my 4 minutes now, but just to say there are 3 particular priority areas: modifiers, uncertainty, and discounting, that are really important to us. Modifiers, or a value framework for how we take our decisions, is part of the consultation. We have at the moment the end of life criteria, but we want to get some feedback on the pros and cons of modifiers that relate to severity and burden of illness. In relation to uncertainty, I've said that's an important thing moving forwards, and we would like to have a framework that clarifies how uncertainty is presented so that we can have a better discussion and interpretation of what that means. And then there's the discount rate, which we've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people around in relation to the evidence for changing that. And there will be a proposal to change that from 3.5% to 1.5%. And we're really keen to get feedback on that, because it is a potentially controversial area. So the next steps are for there to be a 6 weeks consultation starting in November. And this is an initial consultation on what we're calling the case for change. There are various proposals for the future, and we very much want to generate discussion, because the stage after that will then be to formally propose changed methods and process manuals for consultation in February, and that will then be subject to that consultation put in place later in 2021. And I've probably gone over my time, but just to say, alongside all of this specific focus on the methods, NICE also has a process of setting out an ambitious strategy for the next 3 to 5 years for the whole organization. And that will obviously encompass world-leading methods. It will encompass how we support the system to use the technologies that we approve, and very much include an element of using big data. So I'll stop there, but happy to take questions on any of that.
Thanks, Gillian. Thank you very much. And just as a reminder to attendees, as now we will move in the chair discussion, please do post your questions in the little Q&A chat, as we will be monitoring that. And I'm very keen for you to participate in this conversation. But maybe to kind of start us off at a kind of high level, Lord Bethel, if I may ask, what do you see would be, I guess, the role of this methods review in the kind of broader government's ambition to become a kind of life science superpower?
I think it's got a very, very important role. We didn't commit to it half-heartedly. I think that there are three main things that I am particularly conscious of. One is on face value, the objective is to get more innovative medicines into the system earlier. That is the stated objective, and that is the one that I think is by far the biggest priority. I'm really excited by the opportunities of the new science that is developing, and I know that Britain is a fantastic showcase for that new science. And I want us to be the most effective purchaser of medicines for British taxpayers we possibly can be. So I really want that to work, bluntly, and that's all that really matters. But there are two other secondary benefits. One is to reassure the pharmaceutical industry and researchers and the people who commercialize medicines and devices that we are serious, that we listen to them, that we understand their reservations, that they've brought to us a challenge that we can do better in this area, and that we're going to take on board that challenge. And we're going to hear their evidence and to work with them in a collaborative fashion to move forward on this. And whilst we have very clear parameters about how far this review goes and what its net budgetary impact will be, we want to work within those parameters as creatively and thoughtfully as we possibly can to get a mutually beneficial outcome from it. And I take my hat off to NICE for going into this whole thing with a spirit of collaboration. And I think that they will be collaborative, and I think they will be creative. I think that what we will get at the end will be better for the pharmaceutical industry and for the taxpayer and for the patient. And that brings me on to the third thing, which is that ultimately I want the patients to get the medicines as quickly as they possibly can. And maybe sometimes we haven't been as good at that as we possibly could be. But I am, like I said, extremely excited about the novel science that there is out there. It's been particularly good for rare diseases where there is a challenging business case sometimes. I'm particularly interested in developments where there is more of a mass impact, where novel science can be brought to bear on the diseases and health complaints of large numbers of people. We need this review in order to create the environment where that slight pivot can take place. And so those are the three reasons why I'm particularly ambitious for it.
Great, thank you very much. Actually, Richard, I guess one of the difficulties, right, of kind of innovating in this space is I guess the tension between speed and safety. And I was wondering what are kind of industry's reflection on that, obviously on the kind of necessity to innovate and accelerate access, but at the same time ensuring the safety for patients.
I think certainly safety is something that should never be compromised, and I think the role of the MHRA in that space in making sure that they're the absolute guardians of patient safety needs to be very, very strongly supported. And I think there couldn't be a more important time to say that right now, where again, to draw the link with the debate around COVID vaccines, it is something that we just simply can't compromise on, full stop. Where I think there is not so much a trade-off, but just a fact of life, is the more you are accelerating the access to a particular treatment, the earlier you are in its life cycle, and therefore by definition you won't have collected quite as much data and information on that medicine as you would have had later on. So how you deal with uncertainty in exactly what value a medicine delivers over its life cycle is a really well-known challenge, and that's something that we're going to have to get our heads around. And as I said, before, I really think that we're in a very, very interesting time right now in the UK. The MHRA is looking to redefine itself as we come out of the European Union. I think getting acceleration should only happen where it's appropriate and where it's feasible, but we will have to have a similar way of managing that uncertainty in data within the MHRA and with NICE, ultimately also with the NHS, of course, as well. And so, I think, some of the sorts of data infrastructure that Lord Bethell mentioned earlier on in the conversation is also really important here, because that will allow a time ability to adjust to what data tells us. But we do have to make sure that we're taking a reasonable approach to managing uncertainty, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely. And actually, Gillian, there's a question, well, actually, to you, I think, and all other panelists about that alignment between what basically NICE is doing currently with the methods review, but also thinking about the steps that the MHRA is taking to speed up the regulatory process post-Brexit. So it's an attendee who's asking us if you could potentially talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, very happy to talk a bit about the work with the MHRA, because over the past 6 to 12 months, we've been working much more closely with the MHRA. And in fact, that's been helpfully, in a way, catalyzed by COVID, because there's been a coalition of partner organizations who've been working to speed through any new drugs that are potentially helpful for COVID-19. So that's helped, but clearly it's not the same scenario as what we will be facing in January. So what we've been looking at are things like the need to be able to rapidly share data with the MHRA, make sure there are no blocks to that, been making sure we understand what other regulatory jurisdictions the MHRA might be looking to work with, so that we're aware of that and what that might mean in terms of information we receive, and particularly timing, so that we're geared up. We don't want the MHRA to be speeding along, producing a regulatory approval, and we haven't got our ducks in a row to be able to take that straight forward. So a lot of parts of the alignment, which we are currently putting into a new partnership agreement with the MHRA, which we will aim to have on the website by the end of the year, so that people can actually see how that is going to work moving forwards. But really strong desire for the two organizations to work together and make that effective.
Great, thank you. And actually, Samantha, there was a review earlier this year that was published about the kind of patient voice within the regulatory process, and that ultimately the patients are not that aware of the yellow card scheme, which is kind of used as a post-market surveillance mechanism to kind of discuss any issues with medical devices or treatment. So I guess, what changes would you like to see in the kind of regulatory landscape that would take a bit more into account the patient voice?
I think there needs to be a stronger focus on the outcomes that patients value. So often, I don't think those elements are factored in necessarily when a drug company is designing and testing a new treatment. And so there needs to be closer involvement of patients within that process, but then equally in the medicines appraisal process, there needs to be a stronger voice and opportunities for patients to feed in. But thinking about that landscape and ecosystem issue, it doesn't end there. As you say, the emerging need for better real world data means that the emergence of things like the rheumatoid arthritis pharmacovigilance registry is actually a really important tool for then understanding the implications of a treatment in the real world setting, and actually being able to collect that data over a much longer time frame. So when the Cancer Drugs Fund was first developed, you were looking at a 2-year period really. Now some of these agreements are going into sort of 5 or 7 year periods. And actually, if we look at treating diseases at an earlier stage, and therefore having a more preventative effect for patients, actually we will need to gather that data for much longer. And in a way, the NHS is the perfect forum for that. You know, obviously, as a single payer system, I know it's not as easy as that, but in a way, we are set up to allow for better tracking of patients, better tracking of their outcomes, really understanding how changes in terms of comorbidities might actually affect outcomes for patients. And I think there's a real opportunity there to learn from some of the challenges in the past, but to make sure that patient voice is heard at every point in the process.
And do you mind me just asking a very quick follow-up, as there's an attendee who is asking about the kind of need for greater involvement of kind of expert patients and clinicians within specifically NICE's appraisal process. And I guess, how do you see that working out in practice? I know that might be a difficult question, because obviously, you know, it's important to hear about the patient voice, but how do you visualize that actually working?
Yeah, I think this is an excellent question, because I think it has been fraught with challenges. You know, sometimes patients tell us that their experience of feeding into a NICE committee feels quite tokenistic, or they aren't fully involved by the chair, or they don't feel that their experience is valued in that process. So, you know, the sense that a health economist or a clinician has more of a say or more sway in some of those discussions. And I think because value for patients often involves a wider range of considerations. So, for example, for someone with Alzheimer's disease, the impact of their disease on their carer and their carer's health is hugely important. For someone with chronic migraines or pain, there are huge implications on their ability to work. So actually these things, in terms of the value to a patient's experience, aren't factored into a NICE appraisal process. And so I think there are these wider considerations that patients bring to those discussions, which aren't currently factored in and valued in the way that they could be. And from my perspective, I would say that we need to look at how we incorporate those elements of value that also have wider benefits to the public purse.
Actually, speaking about value, there's an attendee who's asking a question specifically to you, Lord Bethel. So it's talking about the fact that obviously NICE combined with the industry voluntary agreement to ensure affordability for the NHS. And so that this attendee is voicing concerns around the fact that additional commercial activities by the NHS might cut across these and result in potentially worsening access to treatments by patients, and was wondering if you had any reflections on this.
Well, that would be counterproductive, and I'm against that. And it's probably Gillian could probably answer this more thoughtfully. But listen, our objective is completely the opposite. Our objective is to accelerate the access patients have to the best possible medicines, whilst working with industry on the existing financial envelope, which is a terrific agreement that we already have in place and is acknowledged as being the correct financial framework for going forward. But Gillian, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
Absolutely, support what you said. There are a few things I'd like to say about real world data, though, if I could quickly, because we're really keen to build a strong reputation around how you use real world data in the analysis that we do across a whole range of technologies. Medicines is part of it, but clearly other types of medical technologies and devices, the collection of real world data is absolutely core. And we've set up a new science, evidence and analytics team. And it's in some ways easy, pre-specified data collected in the real world around new drugs that we've put into the Cancer Drugs Fund is relatively straightforward. A bigger challenge is, what do we do with data that hasn't been pre-specified, coincidentally coming, say, from primary care, showing outcomes that are good or less good? What do we do with that? And can we use that? Is that just a red flag? There's some whole sort of methodological questions that need to be understood and unpicked so that we are able to efficiently use real world data in the future. And the points about the patient voice in our process, we're always evaluating that, and generally we get really strong positive feedback from patients, but as ever, it's never perfect. And something that I want us to put in our strategy for the next 3 to 5 years is a fresh look at how we take the patient voice into account, and whether there's a different way of collating that feedback from patients is something I'm keen to explore.
Great, thank you. Richard, sorry, I saw yourself unmuting yourself. Do you want to come back on those?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to, just in response to the question that you asked, and I just think that, you know, getting this right is a massive opportunity for the UK. And it just all hinges on whether or not we're able to break down traditional silos and get a real end-to-end approach to this early access conversation. And you know, there's, I think, a lot of people and a lot of institutions around the UK kind of ecosystem are all nudging in a similar direction at the moment. It's appropriate early dialogue leading to better evidence, including with the patients, by the way. And I couldn't agree more with the point that Samantha made. You know, we've had a series of events over the last couple of weeks, actually, that is, you know, part of a, you know, real effort that we've got to try and raise awareness around patient centricity in terms of designing clinical trials. Really important agenda which we support. But how to get all of those early dialogue with the patient, with the regulators, with NICE, and ultimately with the NHS as well, so that we have coherent decisions that is manageable for the NHS and makes sure that the best science is used in the right way.
And actually, a follow-up question on the kind of involvement of patients. There's an attendee who, again, strongly agrees with Samantha as well, and is asking actually about the design of clinical trials and in developing new medicines, and asking if it kind of is really fit for purpose, given the current context, and how can we ensure that patient organizations can obviously be taken into account, help and support the clinical trials process, but without damaging their independence and not being seen as, you know, influenced by big pharma. So Richard, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, I mean, I would say that there have been, over recent years, there have been some steps in the right direction, but we've got an awful long way to go. And I think there's so many, you know, ways in which the approach to clinical trials needs to be improved. I think the patient involvement is a really really central piece that we need to get right, as is the diversity within within clinical trials. You know, and I have to say, you know, it's a bit disappointing that we get the feedback that even over the last year, where we've seen clinical trials of COVID-19 vaccines and therapies, where the representation of certain communities is not really where we would ideally like it to be, given how important that we know ethnic diversity is, for example, with it, you know, for really understanding, you know, how the disease works. So there's an awful long way to go, and I think it's going to have to be a multi-stakeholder effort to get there, because we're all part of a research sort of system. I think the whole, you know, how do we get through? I mean, I think the question about how do we make sure that patient groups are not perceived as being captured by big pharma, I don't have a perfect answer to that, to be honest. We've got to work together, but we've got to work together within an appropriate framework with good transparency, and, you know, diversity of funding and everything else, to just make sure that those kind of concerns, you know, are not perceived, but also most importantly, that there is a sort of a proper independence where, you know, where the industry is listening. But I do think there's appetite on the industry side to try and, you know, move further down this path.
And actually, as a follow-up to that, because you obviously mentioned the importance of I guess, diversity in data, and the importance of obviously including certain subpopulations within clinical trials, but obviously to get statistical power within these, you need, you know, a big kind of sample. And I just wonder, do you think that there really is enough appetite from industry to really fully face that question of diversity in data and actually getting that kind of diverse population within a clinical trial setting? Because obviously, you know,
well, it's difficult to give an answer across the whole industry on this one. I just think, you know, my sense is yes, you know, we are as an ABPI strongly encouraged, you know, as the sort of forum where collective work goes on in the industry, to do more work in this area. Like I say, we've just had 3 virtual events over the last 3 weeks, actually, alongside the AMRC and NIHR on exactly these sorts of topics. So I think there is real appetite to discuss how we can do better. But it's a real challenge, and you know, I'm certainly very, very interested in any feedback from any participants on what we can do more, because I'm really committed to it.
There's some really innovative practice in the US, lots of startups really focusing on how you can do clinical trials differently, and global clinical trials platform really using that tech to underpin wider participation, and a lot of community organising going into reaching more diverse communities. So I think there are a number of different areas where we could really boost our clinical trials offer, so that routinely we're inviting patients to be involved, and that we're doing them in a different way. And I think we've seen that through COVID, where, for example, some oncology trials have changed, no longer being carried out in acute settings, infusions being done at home, that make it much easier for people to continue to be involved in clinical trials. And we've heard lots of progress in terms of faster ethics approval, or kind of digital consent, you know, all of which, you know, builds this bigger picture of how can we actually make sure as many people who want to be involved in clinical trials can be, because, you know, I think we have the perfect setting for it. And I think if we can bring together some of these very practical elements with this ambition, I think we'll be on a really sound footing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add, it is really important that there's early involvement, isn't there, of the patient groups, so that we actually measure the outcomes that matter to the patients. It's the old adage, treat the patient, not the X-ray. And I was involved in the trials world earlier in my career, and you know, we measured small amounts of thickening in the artery, but actually what mattered to the patient was, could they walk further? Could they get from their house to the pub or whatever they wanted to go? And you have to measure the real outcomes that matter to people.
Thank you. Lord Bethel, I was wondering if there are, I guess, kind of any lessons that we could learn from the pandemic in terms of acceleration of research, or the support that we have given to the research community, the kind of changes to the regulatory process. I guess, what would be the things that you would like to see carried on post-COVID world?
Well, I think that it's like a sort of massive disruptor, and it's exposed weakness, but also given us huge opportunities. Let me just try and identify a few of those. On clinical trials, the recovery platform has been astonishing and delivered huge value to the world. But in other areas, the restart of clinical trials has been really sluggish, to the point that we have to ask ourselves the question, does the old system is it really going to kick back in the way that we'd hope? And the slowness with which clinical trials are picking up again does beg the question whether we are going to have to rethink the way in which we have done this. And putting patients first may not be a luxury, it may be an absolute necessity, because those patients just aren't in secondary care where we used to find them. And being more systematic about the way in which we do clinical trials may be necessary, because a lot of clinicians simply just don't have the time or can't face the administrative burden of doing it. So I think that's an area where we may have reform and thrust upon us. I think in the area of data sharing, there's been a complete transformation. The very hesitant approach of caution first has given way to a much more proactive, lean-in approach. We haven't thrown out the rule book, but we have given people permission to think about creative ways in which they can combine data from one place to another, to huge effect. It's the number one thing that has come up in our post-match analysis with people on the front line. And I think that that's an area that we can keep driving at. I don't see the elastic band pinging back to where we were before.
Yeah.
I think in some of the technologies, this is less in research, but things like telemedicine, which has jumped ahead. 50% of consultations nowadays are on telemedicine. I think it might grow. I don't think that's going to fall back. It's uncertain. But I think that the way in which technology can be put at the heart of certainly the primary care experience is really exciting. And that's going to be an opportunity, I think, for research, so that we don't have this dependence on dragging people particularly into hospitals or even into community care the whole time in order to provide them with their care. And that means that we can have a wider variety. And then I could go on, but lastly, the issue of diversity has come up. Listen, let's be clear. COVID has spelt out in very stark terms how limited our reach into some communities is. And we've known this point for ages. We have initiatives like Born in Bradford to try and address this, but they are woefully inadequate. And we have to massively rethink the way in which we reach into a representative cross-section of British current society, not just in terms of care and in terms of public health messaging, but also in terms of clinical trials. And that is a massive generational challenge that we have to face up to, I think.
Yes, definitely. And Gillian, actually, is that an aspect that will be potentially looked at in the kind of methods review of how you might go about thinking about value delivered to the patient and to different communities?
It isn't a specific area of the methods review, but it is an area that we're really keen to explore within NICE's breadth of the work that we do across looking at new technologies and new guidelines. And indeed, we always do have a process before we publish anything of checking for potential inequalities and looking at where things might impact on different groups more than others. And we've got some specific guidelines that we've done over the years, say how to improve cardiovascular health in hard to reach communities. And those have been really important aspects of work where we've looked at ways that you might use to effectively take services to people rather than sort of say, well, they're not coming to us, so that's a problem. Think about taking the services to where people are living and working. So we've done quite a lot of work in relevant areas in the past. But like everyone else, we're really sensitive to the current issues and are reviewing what we do right now and looking at how we might make improvements in the future.
Great, fantastic. And actually, we had a question quite early on in the interview from an attendee asking if the kind of panel thinks that actually NICE guidelines and guidance should be given more teeth rather than just staying, as a kind of, I guess, good thing to follow, and that would allow, I guess, interpretations or I guess more limitations around the different types of interpretations that CCGs might have in ultimately restricting access of NICE approved medicines by putting kind of cost savings ahead of best patient care. So I see you nodding, Samantha, so I will go to you first as a
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge issue for patients. We hear all the time that they sometimes in their local CCG don't receive NICE guideline care. And so the more informed they become, the more disappointed or disillusioned they become because their CCG has made a different decision to their neighbouring CCG, and you get what in effect looks like a postcode lottery. So I suppose one of the challenges, I think, with this ecosystem view is how can you ensure that we're investing so much in NICE and these processes that allow us to assess value and prescribe the ideal interventions for the NHS to maximise value for money. But then if local CCGs don't take that on, or even local clinicians don't take that on, and adoption of new therapies, new diagnostics, takes a considerable amount of time, we're not having that pull through of benefit to the NHS. And I think there's a huge issue there around how can we ensure that patients can benefit in their here and now, in their local communities, so that we can translate all of the best science into people's actual lived experience. So I don't know whether that's a more powerful role for NICE guidance, or you know, I think we need to consider the areas where this works best. You know, I know, for example, in Scotland, it's very much led by clinical league tables. I don't know whether that's a system that would work in England, but I think we really do need to look at that as part of this whole picture. Absolutely.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So I'm quite conscious of time, and I would like to ask one last question to give the opportunity to our panelists to have, I guess, they're set out their kind of final thoughts on this. And so my question to you, panelists, would be, I guess, what are your hopes for the next 5 years within the kind of life sciences ecosystem in the UK post-Brexit, for the UK to really kind of deliver on its ambition to become a life science superpower? So Lord Bethel, I will go to you first, and if I could possibly ask to keep the responses quite short as we're reaching the end of the event.
Well, the high level ambition is to pivot from late stage intervention, acute intervention, to early stage and more preventative intervention. So if we could have a big change on that, that would be my ambition. There are loads of things that need to happen for that to happen, but the three ones that I am particularly focused on are digitization, clinical trials, and better regulation. Those are the three that are within our gift as a government and that we can drive, but it requires the collaboration and support of our friends and partners in business, the universities and the NHS, and we've all got to work together to achieve it.
Fantastic, thank you. Samantha, what are your hopes for the next 5 years?
Yeah, so I think even from this discussion, there's a lot of alignment and agreement about what we need to see in that future focus for the UK context. And so I'd say my challenge to Lord Bethel is really around the investment piece. So all of the things you've just described require significant investment to bring about that change. So in any future spending review, I hope you will submit a very strong case to have enough capacity in NICE to do the new work that needs to be done, to have investment in our research communities that delivers that emphasis on clinical trials and pull through for patients. So I think we have a vision altogether for a really powerful UK research ecosystem that has that pull through for patients. And I think the one key thing that would deliver on that is really significant investment.
Fantastic. I saw a thumbs up, so I think, Samantha, you have affected policy change right there. Richard, if I could go to you.
Very, very simply, I want the UK to be the best place in the world to discover, to develop, and to manufacture medicines and vaccines of the future. I want to make sure that patients get access to those and that we measure the impact of those so that we get that feedback loop. I want, real patient outcomes in the UK to be further up the league table, and I'd like industry investment into the UK to be further up the league table as well.
Fantastic, thank you, Richard. And Gillian?
Yeah, briefly, absolutely in line with everyone else. We need, as the UK, to remain attractive to the life sciences industries, and NICE needs to play a key role in assessing the resultant new drugs and other technologies with world-leading methods, I would say that, and we need to have the capacity to do that well, and that is good for the UK, but it's also essential to get access to patients.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. It is now 11:01, so I will have to wrap up the discussion here, but honestly, thank you so much for everyone for your fantastic questions. I'm really sorry for those of you whom I haven't asked the questions that were posted in the Q&A chat, but I really do hope that you enjoyed this very lively discussion. Thank you again to our fantastic panelists today, and for the ABPI's support in organizing this panel. Thank you very much.